Hi, Tom. Welcome back to 10 by 6.
Thank you, Jace. Nice to see you. Hi, those watching. Thank you for tuning in.
And you. Yeah, and absolutely. And you've been suffering from a bit of a cold this week, haven't you? So I'm hoping you feel a bit better.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm on the mend now. I just sound a little bit nasal still, but not too bad. Thank you, mate.
Good. Well, we can't talk about the Sue Gray report because we're still waiting for the posthumous last book from Enid Blyton on how hundreds of people went to a party, but they didn't do anything wrong because they weren't peasants, which I thought was an interesting title by the late Enid Blyton. But what we do know, don't we? We do know, obviously, that it will be either seriously redacted by the time it comes to our eyes, or the corporate media would have rewritten it, or it would just be Boris Johnson's own words with a few less Latin words in between. So, we know pretty much what we can expect. It's not going to be, here's the report. It's probably going to be over the weekend, so they can send a brigade of cabinet ministers out to diffuse it, and then possibly we'll be distracted. So what do you think is the most likely thing happening at the moment, Tom, that will distract us?
Well, the other thing just to mention quickly is that obviously we know the Met Police are finally investigating as well, and of course one of the things that could happen is they'll say that a lot of Sue Gray's reports can't be made public because of it's part of a police investigation now, and of course how long the police investigation lasts could be 6 months, and then they say it's not in the public interest for us to go ahead with any prosecutions or anything. So, there's various ways in which they could, just pretty much bury the whole thing. But yeah, distractions and dead cats. Lots of ways to throw the dead cat on the table. But Ukraine and Russia certainly seems to be the one at the moment. I mean, obviously, that's a thing that's happening. It's not an imaginary made-up dead cat. But how Boris Johnson is responding to it could certainly be put into that category, I guess. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. It's almost like this pot has been on the gas for months, and it's just the heat's been turned up, and there's a few bubbles started to accumulate on the surface. And at some point, when it's politically reasonable to do so from the government's point of view, they'll whack the heat up. It'll froth over the sides, and suddenly we'll be asked to forget all about illegality and lies, parties, and pissing on the public. It'll be about, let's all be patriotic and nationalistic and start hating the Russians, because let's face it, that bear has been hiding in the wood now for 70, 80, 90 years, probably a century if you go back to the Russian Revolution. And it's always been brought out of the woods on a chain every so often to rile people up and get them frothing and distracted, and then it's kicked back into the woods again until again it's politically convenient. But one of the things I wanted to raise with you, Tom, is specifically in this particular edition of 10 by 6 is the comparability, the similarities, the sort of almost mirror with what situation Margaret Thatcher found herself in 1981 before the Falklands conflict, and how she and those people around her saw the Falklands as an absolute opportunity to whack her popularity up and make her look, which up until that point, a very different person. So if I can just go into a quick screen share with everybody, and we can look at the this is the poll from 1981, if you can, everybody can see, and her popularity was almost at -60 in terms of net satisfaction. And then just follow that up. That was the net satisfaction for the government, and then above that is the net satisfaction for Thatcher. And you can see how low it is. So it's -60-ish for the government and -40-ish for Margaret Thatcher. And then suddenly jump forward to March, April 82, when the ships were sailing across the Atlantic, and the good old British service person was now being asked to go and give their lives against somebody that probably months before they'd never heard of. So he jumps right up, as you can see, for both the government and Thatcher. And then if we come across now to Boris Johnson, and we look at where he, October 2019, where he was, there's a few peaks and troughs, but generally, and then now look at it. By January 2022, his unfavorable rating, absolutely huge compared to his favorable rating. And the gap between the two, as I say, is over 50. So what we have there, Tom, are two clear examples of where prime ministers are on their knees. In the first instance, Thatcher was able to use the Falklands conflict, as I said, to get everybody frothed up about General Galtieri and the Argentinians and how despicable they were. No mention, of course, at the time that she was also best friends with Pinochet in Chile, who had a much worse record than the Argentinians in this respect, a complete and utter psychopath. And yet Thatcher, as we saw, welcomed him into her bosom when the Chileans kicked him out, and he was on the run. Now, admittedly, in terms of the Falklands, there was an invasion, and there's a lot of detail about how that invasion took place, because there was information that was put out there by the Foreign Office and other individuals high up that gave the impression to the Argentinian regime that actually invading the Falklands wouldn't be necessarily perceived by the UK as something that important. As soon as they, of course, that they started to do it, that all changed. But in terms of the shadow play that was going on and the shadow politics, it's a difficult one to, obviously, at this point, to go into an analysis. So, what's your take? I mean, there are. We'll come on to in a minute to the Russia-Ukraine situation, more specifically in relation to their relationship. But what's your take at the moment in relation to the way in which, you know, Boris Johnson and Margaret Thatcher seem like two peas in the same pod?
Yeah. So an ideal opportunity, as we say, seized upon obviously now by Johnson and the Tories, his supporters, and the right-wing media that prop him up. In the same way as they did with Thatcher. I mean, Thatcher was unbelievably unpopular after 3 years in power by 82. We had, people forget, we had 15% inflation. We had 15% interest rates. Record numbers of people lost their homes, you know, had their houses repossessed. I think it was around 1 million people had their houses repossessed or something. It was something extraordinary figures. You know, and 3 million unemployed, which, you know, was a massive increase from in the 2 to 3 year period.
That 3 million unemployed, Tom, that was the official figure.
Yeah.
Actual calculations again reveal that it was actually between 5 and 6 million people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all governments massively hide unemployment figures, including probably to record levels. This particular government now have been, you know, finding new and inventive ways to get people off the unemployment register, and they keep boasting about record levels of unemployment when we probably have 6 to 7 million unemployed currently. Staggering. Yeah, so I mean, amazingly unpopular, and her policies were utterly failing. And it was widely regarded that she was absolutely bound to lose the next election. And then the Falklands came along, of course. And there's evidence now, after the sort of 30 odd years, is it, of time elapses when records can be released, and there's various documents that have come out, you know, in the last year or so about what happened prior to the Falklands War and the invasion and stuff, and things about our government knowing that was likely, and sort of allowing it to happen so they could go ahead with the war, rather than taking preventative diplomatic actions that could have stopped it. So So yeah, it was engineered, and as you showed in the graph, her popularity skyrocketed. It was a chance for her supporters and the media to, bandy around all sorts of nationalistic pro-government messages, and everyone supports their government in a time of war. So lo and behold, she won a big election victory after the Falklands. So yeah, I mean, there's obviously a case to be made that Johnson is looking for something similar, a big distraction from the mess that he's in now through his lies and corruption, and a chance to look like a strongman, which is what he always wants to do. And I read a quote the other day that said, it was a quote from the, I would say, right wing, he's regarded as a sort of intellectual American political commentator, Jordan Peterson, who said something like, people, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, people worry about what strong men do. You want to see what weak men do. It was obviously meant as a slight on Joe Biden against Donald Trump, presenting Trump as a strong man. That he's got that utterly wrong, because the real danger is weak men who act strong, weak leaders that act strong. It's invariably men. That's the real danger. People like Trump and Johnson are inveterate liars, utterly corrupt, and essentially very weak as people. They're utterly weak, but they act as strong men. Orban and Bolsonaro and there's lots of other very right-wing world leaders who are, authoritarian. And these people are weak. A true strong leader emancipates the population, enables true democracy at local levels to happen, encourages debate, it allows for greater freedoms, doesn't enact authoritarian policies to steal power and keep power, and doesn't act corruptly. These people are weak, but they act strong. That's the real danger.
Yes. Classic psychological analysis of a bully, isn't it?
Yeah.
That they've come from a position of very low self-esteem, and that they're trying to create this aura around them of strength and authority, which as soon as they come across somebody who's actually stronger than them, or somebody who stands up to them, unless they have a bunch of gang lords around them, they just crumble into the dust. And we probably see that we've seen that on playgrounds of schools for centuries. Absolutely. I think we also should just remind the reader here that this isn't a simple thing about the Russians are baddies and the Ukrainians are goodies, and everybody should now be prepared to let their service individuals go off and get blown to pieces, or make some symbolic gesture to make Boris Johnson or whichever government across the world appear to be strong. I think we just seem to remember some certain things. In Ukraine, there are 15 nuclear reactors underground. That isn't a country that you're going to go and play war on. You also need to remember that despite the nonsense coming out from both sides, both from Putin and from the Ukrainians, the history of Ukraine is extremely complex. And even though the Russians claim to have very much a hold on Ukraine, and even deny that officially that Ukraine is a state, it's really, really important to remember that the claims on Ukraine include Poland, include Lithuania, as well as Russia, not to mention a whole load of tribal gangs, the Cossacks, and the civil wars that existed within those gangs, or those groups, I should say, sorry, because of their geographical positioning within Ukraine and how close they were to a given border, whether it be Lithuania, Poland, Russia, etc. And of course, since 1991, Ukraine has become an extremely important symbolic tool for the West because of its borders along Russia, and obviously the power play that's been going on between the West and the Russian bloc, as I say, for well over a century.
Yeah.
And another key, just finishing off here, Tom, another key article that was written by the Jacobin clearly identifies, with evidence, clear evidence, that since 2015, the CIA and a number of Western governments have been actively training far-right insurgents in Ukraine in order for them to go about terrorist activities, not only in Russia, but in those countries perceived to be sympathetic to Russia. Yeah. And the very final point is that millions and millions of pounds were given to Tories during the 2019 election campaign by members of the Russian government and Russian oligarchs. Yeah. The UK has absolutely no intention to seriously take on Russia over Ukraine. This is a symbolic, this is a constructed conflict in order to divide people in 2022, at the same time as we're seeing a massive economic downfall. So instead of us focusing on the governments that brought around this economic downfall, we're going to be asked to be patriotic and nationalistic and to hate the Russians.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, you know, lots of evidence of huge amounts of Russian funds flowing into the Tory party, particularly prior to the last election. They've encouraged Putin's mates, Russian oligarchs who are friends of Putin, to come and live in the UK, to buy up vast swathes of our land and expensive property. You know, these oil and media magnates and oligarchs from Russia. One of them, Johnson, even made a Tory peer, the Russian media oligarch Lebedev, is his name Lebedev, I think. Made him a peer, you know, and he sits in the House of Lords now. Boris Johnson flies off to Italy for parties at his place in Italy, and you know, it's just staggering, the connections. And of course, Russia, Tories stalled for ages on releasing the sort of report into Russian interference in our elections, and then said, you know, they hadn't even looked at whether Russia interfered with the EU referendum, which is just absolutely ridiculous, and no doubt a lie, but I mean, just ridiculous either way. If they didn't look, it's scandalous and they should all resign. If they did look, then they're hiding the details, which is scandalous. They should all resign. So, I mean, how they got away with that, I don't know. Yeah, so, I mean, as you say, the Tory party are intrinsically linked, particularly financially, with Putin's friends. Staggering, really.
Yes. I don't think any more needs to be said. I mean, people can do their own, you know, the readers and watchers can do their own investigation and analysis. And I just think it's really, really important that people don't jump in with 2 feet from now on when it comes to the UK government going there for their call for arms in relation to this conflict. I think people should start thinking for themselves, isn't we're going to be reiterating this over and over again. Think for yourselves, do your own research, and don't be sucked in to the state and corporate propaganda that you will be enveloped in.
One last thing before we go, it's kind of amusing that it has been commented on by numerous people that Liz Truss, who's now unbelievably our Foreign Secretary, gave us a stern rebuke to Putin last week, which I'm sure, you know, he was quaking in his boots about. You know, this ex-KGB officer reportedly killed 3 people himself, you know, has ruled in an authoritarian manner in Russia for many, many years, kills his political opponents with Novichok or whatever, you know. And I'm sure when Liz Truss gave him a stern rebuke, I'm sure that would have really made him sit up and pay attention. I suppose he went, "Oh, kill her."
Yeah, no, I think from Putin's perspective, he'll be sat in his luxurious apartment, sat on a luxurious settee, and he'll get his laptop and he'll press the recording, or press play, I should say, on the recording of Liz Truss, and all the stress of the day will melt away as he belly laughs into the night.
He'll probably send us some cheese.
Have a great week, Tom. You take care.
You too,
have a great
mate.
week, everybody.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Cheers, Jace.